what I'm saying is actually, Hank, according to the UN 2022 Asian and the Pacific Sustainable Development Goal Progress Report, at the current rate of change, none of the 17 SDG objectives will be achieved in all 5 sub-regions. So from your experience working in climate action and biodiversity, what are the possible solutions to this? Actually, I mean, you've been advocating for economically and environmentally beneficial market solutions to decarbonization. What is the role of private sector in responding to the climate change? What role should the financial institution play? Actually, you know, like I was also talking to Larry Summers. He was saying the World Bank, I mean, AIB, ADB, all the other banks could play more roles. So what do you think of private sector financial institution roles?
There's a lot of discussion about the role of the private sector. To me, climate change is the major predictable crisis that our planet faces. And this can only be solved if government and the private sector work together, right? Governments can do research on climate, they can set policy, but only the private sector can implement those policies, roll them out in scale. Only the private sector. And so let's start with the private sector. It seems to me that the private sector, there's a number of things. First of all, financial institutions need to do a better job of developing climate financing techniques and models. They can do stress tests. I think financial institutions need to disclose the impact of investment, right? Positive and negative impact on climate. So that's pretty clear in terms of that. Venture capital firms can do a lot of work in terms of develop breakthrough technologies and get them ready to scale. That's pretty clear. Also private equity firms. I'm the executive chairman of a TPG private equity firm, and they can put capital behind climate solutions that are proven to accelerate the development of those. But you need to begin with the fact that private sector can't do it without the government policies. It's going to take trillions and trillions of dollars the governments don't have. That money needs to come from the private sector, correct? And it's not a sustainable model for the private sector to make loans or investments that are going to make losses. So the government needs to create the regulatory environment. I agree with Dr. Summers that one of the biggest things that needs to be done is to reform the multilateral development banks and the Bretton Woods institutions. But there, the governments need to come together and change the charter so that these institutions have the financial resources and the technical resources and the legal framework it takes to do the work that they need to do. So what I would say right now, the private sector is well ahead of governments, and that there's a lot of ambition in the private sector, but if we talk too much about private sector, it takes the focus on what needs to be done, because governments need the political will to put the policies in place that are going to let the private sector be successful.
Great. I mean, thank you, Hank. You made a lot of great initiatives. I think that has been very dedicated to this thing. I think that we need global business leaders and financial leaders, and as you said, government, to really all work together. NGOs combined to really achieve this sustainable development consensus and also efforts to that. Now I'd like to talk to Wang Shi.
Okay, Mr. Wang, last year you went to COP26 in Glasgow. So what is your biggest takeaway in this conference? So, for example, the low carbon economy. What is your take on the carbon neutral economy in terms of how such economy benefit both business and environment? So it's fair to say that last year in COP26 in Glasgow, I was attending that conference, and I also for the first time organized the executives or senior executives of Chinese businesses. And from 2009 all the way to 2019, I was organizing the businessmen on behalf of China's businessmen to attend the China's conference in Glasgow, in the COP conferences, including Glasgow conference of last year. It's fair to say that it's a very great achievement and a lot of takeaways. And the number of the conferences and meetings of the COP26 regarding China is increasing year by year. So with the China senior managers, the conversation was very good, and we reached consensus among us. And the COP26 is the conference with the biggest number of the attendees, about 25,000 attendees attending the conference in Glasgow. And this is in the official meeting, and after the meeting, there's also a lot of activities surrounding the COP26. It's fair to say that every day we would see numerous meetings and conversations being held, also including China's delegations and activities, and also a lot of attention has been spared to China as well. That is my impression, and my biggest impression, or left the biggest impression to me for the 12 past years. And last year, due to the COVID, we have to get COVID test every day. And all the organizations and countries' delegations are very passionate about the conference. And on the COP26, a tropical forest protection declaration was launched. And we want to wait and see for the final achievements and how this declaration ended up. And we need to see how actions were taken instead of just lip services. And at the same time, we feel that although we know there's a lot of imperative issues in front of us, but still we have to strike the balance of the different interests and also the interests of the different stakeholders. So the agreement reached by all stakeholders is very difficult. Nobody knows what will come until the last minute. So this is really a valuable and a hard-earned declaration in the end. For example, U.S. and China and EU, the conversations and explorations on the future solutions for cooperation is always continued. And without the participation by either one of them, there's no speak of the collaboration in the end for the climate issues and many other issues related to this. But still, I'm very positive about this outcome. China's businesses and China's businessmen or entrepreneurs of China, they also have expressed their feelings and opinions in the COP26, and they have shared the stories of the 4 decades of reform and opening up of China. And in the first 2 decades, China was mainly featured by the fast development or the high growth rate of the economy. And so that has been acknowledged by the world. And in the second 2 decades, activities of low carbon development also initiated and embarked on. So the private businesses initiated the journey, and the state-owned enterprises initiated their own journey, and they combined their journeys together. And MNCs and private sectors and public sectors, they combined their efforts together. And that's why the environmental conservation and natural conservation have achieved a lot of achievements. At the same time, the government and the private companies and public companies, they have to join hands together, just being alluded to by Mr. Henry Paulson, that the passion and also the endeavors need to be generated, and also especially from the private enterprises. So the consensus and also the declaration and achievements reached by all stakeholders and governments in UNFCCC COP conference is very important, especially on the climate summit and also in the climate related conference. China needs to demonstrate its own features and also demonstrate its own achievements as a demonstrative to other countries. And also, we also need to have other countries to know our own features and traditions as a foundation for further collaboration between each other. So I think more and more we will see opportunities like this. On the other hand, China's NGO also continue becoming stronger and stronger. We have witnessed their strength on COP26 as well. In the past, the NGO's participation was not that strong, but on this COP26, we have seen a very strong participation and endeavor made by the NGOs of China, and they become more and more influential. And the third positive takeaway is that the youngsters are the future of all kinds of endeavors. We have also seen the jointly launched the United Coalition of Universities, sort of like this, have been launched last year. And this is also very important to demonstrate the strength of the youngsters from this young graduates from the universities as well. We have also seen the organizations organized by the university students and scholars, young scholars, and they made a lot of speeches on the COP26 conferences as well. And we have had the activities both online and offline, participated by a lot of young scholars and students from universities and colleges. I think the journey ahead of us are full of bumps. And China is also have a long way to go. The 2030 carbon peaking and 2060 carbon neutrality, the dual carbon goals are in front of us, which is very arduous. And China's 2060 and other advanced countries are normally 2050, 10 years left behind. Probably we can set the deadline a little bit earlier than scheduled. But I think 2060 is the realistic deadline. Even 2060 is very arduous for us. But on the COP 26, China's delegates have made the commitments that we would try our best before 2060, carbon neutrality will be attained by China. And this is a realistic target, and we'll try our best to attain that target. So I think this is really good environment created by all delegations. And this is also very positive to push forward and promote the future initiative. And China's NGOs and China's organizations played a very big role. As for my participation, on my part, I've expressed that I, not only on behalf of my company, my group, Banco, but also I'm on behalf of the different sectors and industry of China, like real estate sector, real estate or housing sector is account for more than 10% of the carbon emissions in manufacturing. In terms of the building materials for the commercial buildings or residential buildings and the school buildings and all kinds of buildings, the carbon emission in the building materials account for even bigger, about 30 to 35% of the total urban development. Compared to advanced countries, this is a little bit bigger. So although this chunk is very big, still we are on the way to abate it. On COP26 conference, we made it very clear that we are going to make a very clear plan and also clear targets to attain before COP26 and express it on 27. And right now we are on the way of the carbon abatement in urban development, in the building of those infrastructures and the housings. So COP26 is not only the demonstration of actions, but also the commitment that we are going to prepare for COP27, and we are going to launch our plan in the near future. Thank you.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, great. Yeah, I can see what Mr. Wang just said. the very important is to have private sector and business sector, government, to work together to achieve this sustainable environment objectives. Of course, carbon neutral. So you, Mr. Wang, you emphasized the importance of business, government, and of course also NGO. So that's a great example of what you have experienced at the COP26. And what I think actually is very, very useful is that you also mentioned about business, mobilization. I mean, they have to do that. I mean, China is now the business sector, for example, clean energy vehicle, Tesla is doing fabulous in China. Wind power, solar power, all those things that China is leading probably in the world to some extent. But also you mentioned about the real estate sector, where Wang Huiyao is a big, one of the largest real estate developer in China. And actually, you mentioned about there's 30–40% that carbon emission could be done, be saved through the real estate development. So that's really great stuff to talk about. Now, I'd like to talk to Secretary Paulson now. And, the biggest challenge actually for achieving 2030 agenda today lies actually fragmented.
Dr. Wang, I hear you again. You're cutting in and out.
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now, Hank? Can you hear me now?
I can hear that, right.
Okay, great. So what I'd like to talk to you now is that the biggest challenge actually for achieving the 2030 agenda today lies in our fragmented multilateral system. It is unfortunate that the United States and China, particularly the world's two largest economies, are locked in this tense strategic competition, where it's also Secretary Blinken recently mentioned the competition as well. So Mr. President, you mentioned about economic eye curtain speech really drive the message home some time ago. So climate change is the area of U.S. China cooperation that holds really potential. And both Secretary John Kerry and Minister Xie Zhenhua, the two climate envoys by both President Xi and President Biden, has spoke each other at Davos and COP26 and actually reached agreement. John Kerry actually even attended our meeting at the Security Conference about 2 years ago at the CCG. So what do you think? I mean, how the U.S. and China relation go forward? I mean, what are the possible paths for cooperation for the two countries amongst competition? But then there's a climate change, there's a finance crisis, a recession, high inflation, people exchange, global development. So what's your overall assessment, for the Sino-U.S. cooperation, and what are the challenges we have to face?
Okay, Dr. Wang, I think I got most of that. So let me begin by saying, I think there's no doubt that our two countries are strategic competitors. And I think we're competitors across really all of the domains, technology, finance, economy, military, and ideology. But despite that, our two countries have common goals. We have some shared interests. We need to have peace, stability, world order, a stable climate, right? And so we have shared goals. And so the question is, how can we cooperate at the same time we compete? And I think there's a number of areas that are important. Citizen exchanges are very important. I mean, the work that Wang Xi and I have done over the years, what I found, even though I have a very different culture and political system, the Chinese and American people like each other. We have a natural affinity for each other. And I think some of it has been hampered by COVID, right? I haven't been able to travel to China since 2019. Many business people that were in China have come back as a result of COVID. So I think that's important. Climate change obviously is another area, and that is an area that our two presidents have designated as an area where we should work together. We've got groups working together on, on methane and on other things as climate. I think this is made more difficult by the competitive relationship and what I consider to be a fraught relationship. But as I think about the areas where we should be working together, and I think it's important to both countries that we do this and to the whole world, because we are the biggest climate emitters, right? China is by far the biggest emitter of carbon emissions, and the U.S. has only 4% of the world's population, with 11 to 12% of carbon emissions, right? And so both countries have got a real need to work together. And so here's what I think we should be doing. First, we both should be doing more research and developing the breakthrough technologies we're going to need to avoid climate disaster, and some of the harder technologies we need to do. So that is clearly an area we should work together. I think we both should work on lifting and eliminating tariffs on environmental goods or services. Makes no sense to charge tariffs on environmental goods and services, right? Doesn't make economic sense, doesn't make ethical sense to pay more for the environmental goods and services we need. We can cooperate more. We each need to provide incentives to channel private sector money into developing and rolling out in scale the technologies that we need to reduce carbon emissions. I think we both can do more to share technologies and make sure that we deploy the key technologies in each of our countries. This may require some concessions on both of our governments' part, but I think that's very important. I think so. We need to develop clean technologies, and I think we need to really work to accelerate the reduction of carbon emissions in emerging nations. Each of us can do that, right? Just looking at the brick and roads countries, they're responsible for 28% of carbon emissions today, but by 2050, it could be 60% if we don't do something, so we can work there. And lastly, I'm going to come back to the point that you mentioned that Larry Summers said, which is, when we look at carbon governance, global carbon governance, because, to me, it was inspiring, really inspiring to hear what Wang Huiyao was doing and everything China was doing and Wang Huiyao has done in Glasgow. That's very, very necessary, but it's not sufficient, right? So right now, we are, even if we met the Glasgow targets, the globe would overheat, and we're not even close to being on a path to meet those targets, right? And so I think we need a different approach to climate governance. And we're not going to get anywhere unless we see the U.S., China, India, the other big countries doing more at the governmental level to incentivize industry. So there's a lot we can do. One area where we can work on together is, on the Belt and Road, for instance, and the Paulson Institute, my institute, is working with the Green Principles. We were the first U.S. NGO to join into that effort, work with to set green development principles for the Belt and Road. I think in working with multilateral development banks, the Paulson Institute is working with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which are doing some very interesting things there. But I think all multilateral development banks and the Bretton Woods institutions need to do more. And we're not going to do more unless the governments come together to give them the capacity and the financial support they need. And so this is an area where U.S. and China and the other major countries of the world need to cooperate and work together. So there's a lot to be done. I've got to be honest in saying there's not nearly as much being done as should be being done. And that has to do with, the strategic competition and the nature of the fraught relationship between our two countries. But I come back again to say, there's nothing wrong with admitting we're strategic competitors and we're competing in all these areas. But we also need to acknowledge both countries have shared goals. We need peace. We need prosperity. We need a global order that works. And we need to save our planet, because climate change is a threat not only to economic security, but global stability and life on Earth as we know it. So I believe that we have a saying in the U.S. that necessity is the mother of invention, right? And I happen to believe that necessity is going to bring our countries together. And again, I look forward to the day when we can travel freely and I can visit China and we can have more interpersonal relations. Because the reason I set up, part of the reasons I set up the Paulson Institute is I knew there were going to be tough times between our governments, Beijing and Washington, D.C. Now, I didn't predict it was going to be as tough as it is now, but they're going to be tough times. And I think we need other linkages, people-to-people linkages, economic linkages, NGOs working together, people working together to solve. And that's why I think the work that Wang Huiyao did, bringing the big delegation from China to Glasgow to interact with all the other leaders around the world, is so essential. So I say thank you to Wang Huiyao.
Great. Thank you, Hank. You're absolutely right. I think we need the multiple linkages and exchanges and dialogues like this, and particularly face-to-face dialogue that we hope that you can come as soon as we lifted all those quarantines. And so you mentioned about this critical component of cooperation between China and U.S. I mean, you particularly, I highly supported your idea, on a tariff for those environmental sustainable development products. We should really give them, lift the tariff sanctions. Particularly now we're facing such a high inflation. I mean, also the food crisis, energy crisis, Ukraine-Russian conflict.